Welcome back, everyone. I'm Nick Link with Dr. James Liu and our special guest today, Caitlin Dowling. She's actually a teacher that works at my school as well, Passaic County Tech. And she's also been through a lot of issues herself with endocrine, and my earbuds are falling out, with endocrine issues. And I think you've probably been to more doctors than I have until you kind of figured out what was going on. So she's just going to, again, like I did at our first episode, share her experiences, just to, get the word out there. And just kind of chat about what you had to go through and things like that. So,
yeah, and thank you very much for coming on and sharing your story.
Yeah, thanks.
Of course.
Like we're talking about right before the recording is Nick and I developed this platform, or I guess this YouTube channel, just so that people can come and share their experiences with us and really let the public know what all these different endocrine conditions entail.
Right.
Because you'll probably go into this. A lot of things is a lot of these symptoms are very generalized. You don't know which way to go.
Definitely.
Yeah. So why don't you share us your story? Like what brought you to see an endocrinologist in the first place?
Like, when did you start not feeling right?
Well, so probably with what's been going on now, it's been almost like 2 years of just my weight going up like crazy. And so everybody would be like, try this, try this, try this. So tried everything. Won't go down for anything.
Okay.
Yeah, you would do there were the shakes you would do. I remember that. Yeah.
Shakes, and that was convenient because,
Yeah.
I'm not a big breakfast eater anyway. And then, with work, it's so easy to drink a shake.
And they're yummy too.
And they're good.
Yeah.
I've tried Jenny Craig. I've tried intermittent fasting. I've tried, Weight Watchers. I've tried everything you can think of. And my weight just kept going up. And I can't work out a ton because I also have fibromyalgia. So it's, if I do too much, then I won't be able to get out of the bed the next day with that. And I definitely conserve a lot of my energy for work anyway. So, I wasn't working out a ton, but the weight started just going up all the time. And then last summer, it really just spiked like crazy. So I ended up going... I was down to probably, before the weight started really going up, I was down to maybe 140, I think. And then it spiked. By the end of last summer, I was at 190.
Yeah, remember you were really thin at one point.
And I always was so tiny. So to have these weight problems now is so stressful for me.
Okay.
And I was eating, my mom would put out vegetables, instead of chips out by the pool. She was purposely doing things too, and we weren't seeing any results. So I went to just a regular doctor to get a physical first.
Okay.
And they did a workup of the blood, for just do basic stuff. Nothing stood out, but the doctor agreed, okay, something definitely doesn't seem right because going up and down, up and down. Before that, I had been seeing a neurologist for the fibromyalgia, but I also have anxiety, and I get migraines. So he was even trying to figure out, well, is any of your medications that you're on now doing that? We were trying to play around with things. We weren't seeing anything. So then I eventually, the doctor that when I went to go get the physical, they were the ones that actually suggested the endocrinologist, and they suggested my doctor. And so when I got there, she was really understanding, and she definitely was, agreed, it seemed like I was doing all the right things and my weight is not going down. Other things we happen to notice a lot, especially at work, is I would get really red all the time.
Yeah, those hot flashes you would get.
Hot flashes, night sweats. Some of it's the fibro, I get tired real easily and all that stuff, but it's hard to know which one it was kind of, is it this, is it that, is it something totally different? And a lot of the weight just was sticking more to my middle of me. And then I always felt like my face was getting much rounder, even though, again, I was trying to do everything to lose it. So then I went to the endocrinologist, and she kind of listened to everything, laid out a bunch of scenarios it could be. So she was talking about Hashimoto's for a while. She did mention the Cushing's. And then she had me go get more blood work done with more specific things that she was looking for. And then eventually she found that the cortisol levels were the ones that were kind of off. It's just, in my brain, I call it like a mild case of things, because it wasn't like it was a huge difference. It was just that little bit was
Right.
off enough
Right.
to cause problems, but it wasn't enough that she was ready to like move too much forward right then and there. She put me on some medication, so I inject myself every day with this one medication. We got about 30 pounds off of me.
Okay.
And we wanted to see, is that going to help? Is that going to change anything? Is that, anything at all? But then back in February, I would say, February or March, right around when everything was going on, I noticed like I wasn't losing any more weight. Like it just was not coming off at all, whereas it was coming off fast.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, I'm taking this medication. It's suppressing my appetite. I'm not eating a lot. What I am eating is good, and yet I'm not losing any weight.
Right.
So I had to telemed with her because now we're in quarantine, so I can't even go to my regular, doctor visit that I would have had. And then she was like, well, let's see, so she changed the dosage on the medication I was on. So we did try that. Didn't see any results after a few weeks, called her back. And she's like, let's look at the cortisol levels again. So she did suppression tests. So I had to take this pill around 11 o'clock at night, and then go get the blood work at 8 in the morning to go see. And it's supposed to really drop it, and it only dropped it so much.
Right.
Is the way she explained it to me.
Yeah, and we'll go through that in more detail.
And then I've also done 24-hour urine collection tests because of the free cortisol in the urine that they look at. And so she found both of those were on the higher side. So then that's when she said like 75% of the time it's caused by a mass on the pituitary gland. So she sent me for an MRI, and I got that back in June. And then that did show a very, very small mass. It was only 2 to 3 millimeters. So then she referred me to a neurosurgeon. And then the neurosurgeon wanted more slices of it because it's just so tiny.
Right.
And the way he said it, it's so hard to diagnose it as Cushing's, and same thing with the endocrinologist, is because it's just all my stuff's right over the border. Like the neurosurgeon said, if it was a really large mass, it actually, we'd see a lot more symptoms, instead of the mild symptoms, if you want to call it, and therefore, it would have been easier to diagnose. So now I actually just Wednesday night went for another MRI to have more slices of it, and I'm waiting for a call back from him.
Okay. Yeah. And so before we get into the talking about the disease itself, we want to keep our viewers in suspense, so we don't want to give them the answer yet.
Got to save the good stuff for later.
But what's it like, going back to your history with fibromyalgia? How long have you suffered with fibromyalgia?
It's been probably about 4 years now.
4 years. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you still remember what type of symptoms you were having at that time that brought you in?
Yeah. So everything started, I was just really sick. Around May, June, I kept constantly having random fevers and wasn't feeling well. I
remember getting a lot of headaches.
Sick days. I was getting a lot of headaches. Yeah. And then, so I went to just the urgent care after probably about a month of that, I would say, because I also was just having a lot of muscle soreness. And a lot of it's by the joints. So I'm thinking oh my God, I'm outside. Do I have Lyme disease or something? And that's exactly what the urgent care. They immediately tested me for Lyme, said I had a positive Lyme thing, put me on these antibiotics put me on antibiotics for 3 weeks.
Okay.
Went back because nothing changed.
Yeah.
She was like, all right, you're going to have to go to an infectious disease doctor to get a better workup. So he did the Lyme test again. The first one, the one that they did with the urgent care, it wasn't as specific. He did a much better test.
Okay.
I actually was negative. I never had Lyme. That first one was a false positive.
Okay.
So then he did a workup of tons of diseases. And he's the one that actually came back with the fibro diagnosis because of the fact that there was nothing else there. The only thing we saw was that I had a very high antibody count for Epstein-Barr, for mono.
Okay.
So we're wondering if I had mono back at that time.
Yeah. And it's possible. And
they're showing a lot of studies that are, the two are going together. So.
Yeah, the diagnosis of fibromyalgia is challenging.
Very challenging.
Because it's one of these what we call like a diagnosis of exclusion.
That's what they say.
It's
all
almost
the
like
time.
lupus, same thing.
Yeah,
Right?
so
Yeah.
you have to test for everything,
Yep.
and if everything comes back negative, and then plus you have physical findings, I think they have to test 11 points, and then if you
Yeah.
have a certain I'm not a rheumatologist, but
That's
you,
who I also had to go to
Yeah,
get
right.
another. I had
Right,
three
right.
different doctors that the infectious disease, the
Right.
rheumatologist.
Yeah, I
and then
remember
the
you saying that you
and
thought
then
it was RA then too. Yeah.
Yeah, the neurologist. All three of them ended
Right.
up confirming
Yeah,
it.
and then once you rule everything out and you still have the physical findings, then that's when they give you that diagnosis. And yeah, and it's well the reason I'm asking is with this current revelation in the I'll just say it for Cushing's disease. Okay, is that I wonder if you may already started suffering some symptoms back 4 years ago.
That's what I was wondering too when I
Yeah,
started to
'cause-
see some of the symptoms for Cushing's. I'm like, oh, muscle fatigue, the headaches,
Yeah.
the dizziness, the
Right.
everything.
So
Oh,
Nick, you want to explain to us what Cushing's disease is?
It's pretty much excess cortisol that's in the body. And the big thing you said where you started gaining weight in your stomach and your face is, cortisol, as we know, it's stress hormone. So it's long-term stress. It's good for us. It's usually higher in the morning, wakes us up, it should be lower at night. And that's why they also, stress, right? Chronic stress can actually cause Cushing's symptoms, right?
Well, it can raise your stress hormone
Yeah.
level, and it's now we're seeing more issues with chronic stress, because the whole stress system, cortisol,
Yeah.
it
Lack of sleep, just
yeah
doing
it
more
would,
and more and
yeah,
more.
it was never really evolutionary designed to be on
Long term,
consistently.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So if it's on consistently, then it can result in chronic conditions and in symptoms.
Yeah, one of the side effects of cortisol is it starts breaking down your extremities, like your muscles too. And then if you don't need that, it's turning into sugar. And if you don't need that sugar at that time, it's just going to store it in your face and your stomach. So that's why
Yeah,
a lot of
and-
people with the disease have that.
Yeah, and also just for our listeners out there is just to define these terms a little bit better. So there are several terms that we use in endocrinology. So there's Cushing's syndrome. Okay, Cushing's syndrome is anything that causes an increase in cortisol or steroids in your system. So you can get Cushing's syndrome from a tumor in the pituitary. You can get Cushing's syndrome either from a tumor in the adrenal glands or what we call hyperplasia, where you have increased cellularity in the adrenal glands. You can also get Cushing's syndrome from taking exogenous steroids.
Yep.
So like your
Cortisol.
prednisone, dexamethasone, hydrocortisone.
I actually had a friend in high school who he was on prednisone for, God, years, and he got off of it and he dropped like 60 pounds
Right.
in like a
Well,
few
I,
weeks.
and I had that experience last summer. Remember?
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah,
When
yeah.
I was having those joint pains, I was taking high doses of steroids for
Yeah.
almost 2 months.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think I've ever been as heavy as I ever was.
Right,
you know,
right.
back then. Interesting enough, when I finished my residency, so when I went from my internal medicine residency to my endocrinology fellowship, is that my stress level dropped significantly. And just from that, like within a few weeks, I've dropped, I remember specifically dropping like 7 or 8 pounds.
Yeah.
Just from that
Wow.
reduction in stress.
Yeah, right.
And
Yeah, so Cushing's syndrome is anything that elevates, whether it's naturally elevated, pathologically elevated, whether it's artificially elevated, with steroids. So this all groups under Cushing's syndrome. Cushing's disease is very specific. So Cushing's disease specifically refers to a tumor in the pituitary, or a pituitary cause of excess cortisol production. And this is most likely caused by a adenoma, or a benign tumor in the pituitary that makes too much ACTH, which is what stimulates the cortisol production. So then there are so when you look at Cushing's, and then there are also other medical conditions that can mimic Cushing's. So things like type 2 diabetes can sometimes mimic some of the symptoms that we see with Cushing's disease, polycystic ovarian syndrome, especially if it does cause irregular menstruation. And interesting enough, even pregnancy.
Yeah.
Even sometimes pregnancy can mimic the symptoms, and that's because of all the chemical changes that happen in the body, and in effect, because of increased protein binding in pregnant women, their cortisol levels usually higher. This is also true for people who are taking birth control pills too.
Interesting. The birth control?
Yeah, because of the increased estrogen.
Ah, makes sense.
Yeah, so it's but I have to tell you, it is sort of the bane of endocrinology. Okay,
Of course.
that is because it is incredibly difficult to diagnose, and when I reviewed your information, I could see that multiple tests were done just to arrive at one or two positive results. And this is typically what we see is sometimes if you have a strong enough suspicion of Cushing syndrome, is sometimes you may need to test 3, 4, even 5 times, to get a positive result. And that's because this is how hormones work, is that if you're dealing with a hormone that sort of ebbs and flows throughout the day, you have to catch it at just the right time.
Right.
And anything can influence it. Let's say the day before the test, you didn't sleep well. Okay, well, that's going to throw off the test in the morning because now the level's going to be a little bit high. Okay. You're more stressed. You got rear-ended on the way to get your blood dropped, or the phlebotomist brought out the really big needles.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So all of those can cause well, it's a natural rise because of the stress with the cortisol, and that's why it's very difficult to diagnose. So how has this impacted you in terms of your daily living, in terms of getting up, going to work, in terms of your the emotional tolls that
It's been really difficult. I think my biggest thing is I could deal with a lot of stuff, but one of the few things that I never deal well with is when my weight changes.
Okay.
So to have that, and not be 120, 130 pounds like I, was in college, and I was even tinier in high school, has just always been just really, that just drives me insane. And then I just end up very self-conscious all the time. I've changed how I dress. I've changed my entire wardrobe. In the winter, I'll wear a lot of baggy stuff, especially because you can hide things in the winter, I guess, better. I layer all the time now. I wear one-piece bathing suits. I have a one-piece on underneath this, even though I have drawers full of bikinis because I refuse to wear them. Right. So I think that, honestly, has really been the hardest for me. But then to finally slowly be getting answers and slowly not feel like I'm going insane, because I just internally, I would always say, something is up. I know something up. I know I'm not feeling myself. So it's to finally have some answers is just huge, and to just have an idea of where we're going to go with things and not feel like I'm going crazy has helped a lot more, because I'm starting to get defeated almost.
And I think in several episodes we've mentioned this is in the beginning when you were feeling like crap all the time,
don't want to do anything, you don't want to go anywhere.
But the hardest thing is people would just look at you and just say, well, just live a better lifestyle.
Or you're doing too much.
Right. And then you feel guilty because you're gaining weight and you feel like you're doing something wrong, even though you're trying to do everything right. And at the same time too is you're not really enjoying what most people gain weight in the first place. You're not having your tub of ice cream.
You're eating bland foods,
it's I'm
vegetables.
Cutting all the good stuff out, and nothing's changing. It's then why bother cutting it out? I might as well go to eat that ice cream.
So it's like twice as frustrating.
Yes, exactly.
Because you're suffering the symptoms without having the joy of causing it.
Oh my God, yes.
Without the dopamine rush.
Yes. And I would just obsess over it. In my brain, I'm like, okay, what is going on? Or, I mean, weighing myself every single day is the smallest little change happening, and, staring in the mirror all the time, you just, okay, what is up? What is up? You know, so,
And I feel like, unfortunately, society has a big impact on that too, because
Huge.
the way they portray women and men, body imaging, and how they should look, and
Oh, yeah.
everyone thinks they should have this like perfect Barbie
Right.
figure, but it's not possible. You know,
Exactly.
so
Well, it takes a lot of work.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then
It's,
it's not fun. Like,
Yeah.
You can't
but-
enjoy the ice
yeah,
cream.
yeah.
but also like we discussed in our our episode on obesity too, is a lot of these are not so much what you're doing or not doing. You know, I think most people feel like they're doing the right things, but then there are just some things that are making metabolically things worse.
Yeah.
Right.
And you know, people who are obese don't. A lot of them, if you count up the number of calories they eat, they actually don't eat that many calories. But it may be something else underlying that could be driving this. You know, whether it be inflammation. You know, which
Food allergies, even.
yeah, which goes with inflammation, which then drives up the insulin resistance and the high insulin level, and then that just spirals.
Right.
Yeah. Could be having too much cortisol, like in your case.
Yeah.
Okay, mechanism is similar, because what stress hormone does is that the stress hormone makes your body more resistant to the actions of insulin. And evolutionarily, this makes sense, because when you're running away from a saber-toothed tiger, okay, when you're running away from a saber-toothed tiger, you don't want your body to use up all your sugar reserve, because that's what your brain runs out of, and you have to have enough substrate for your brain to remain alert. Okay, so that's part of that mechanism. It also increases the production of sugar in your body. It revs up the gluconeogenesis. Okay, so then that further ups your sugar level. Okay, and all of these, again, from an evolutionary standpoint, is that these are to fuel your brain, so that as you're running away from a threat, you don't collapse. You know, because
Your brain shuts off.
your brain shuts off.
Yeah. Right.
No more fuel.
Done.
or at least the ancient humans who brains run out of fuel, they're no longer with us.
Yeah.
But you know, in your case, you know, in a lot of cases, is that you have this chronic increase in cortisol, so your body's always having that response, even though it doesn't really need it. The other thing is the storage of energy is different when your cortisol level's high. It tends to drive more storage into fat cells, and more specifically are what we call central weight gain. So this is in sort of the neck, you know, upper shoulder area, back of the neck. I don't know if you ever heard of, seen people with what we call a dorsal cervical hump.
I always thought that was so weird.
You know, or the other more common names, the buffalo hump.
Yeah.
It's when you have that fat pattern
Yeah.
in the back in there. The other thing too is you notice your trunk will get bigger. So naturally, you know, normally women store their fat more on the lower body, okay, or what we typically refer to as more of the pear shape. But with Cushing syndrome, you start storing it more in the central area, you know, or what we call the apple shape. So it's it's frustrating, you know. It's frustrating when you have to live with this and you don't have an answer. So how do you feel now that you actually have a diagnosis?
A little bit better, you know,
Okay.
because to me then it's like, all right, now we can make a game plan, and maybe things can change and get a little bit better, and then I'll start to feel better, and you know, so I'm glad, like, you know, I went and figured, you know, got all of the stuff done. It might have taken some time, but you know, I feel better having some knowledge than being in the dark completely. That's more frustrating.
Yeah, and I have to say, I have to give, you know, kudos to your endocrinologist for actually listening and figure these things out.
Yeah.
As I said, with most, you know, it's one of the unfortunate things is that a lot of medicine now is more reflex. You know?
Yeah, we spoke about that.
Right,
Yeah.
right. You go in with a symptom, and they would just diagnose you with the first two most likely things, and then that's it. And then they don't go one step further. So that's the other thing is you found a great great doctor who would listen,
Yeah.
who would listen and follow up on these results. And I can tell you it's not easy to tell people to go back and repeat tests over and over and over again.
I feel like
Most
I've
people
done
don't
some of
get
them
it,
so
yeah.
much.
Right, because one thing is you feel bad because we keep sending you back for blood draws or having you walk around with like a huge canister of urine.
That's like when I for 24 hours I don't leave my house.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I have to keep it in the fridge too.
Right, and then the and I know have I if patients have told me like they question my competence because I keep sending them back for tests,
Yeah.
and they get frustrated. They're like, well, do you even know what you're doing?
No.
But the diagnosis is again can be frustrating, but the screening test I saw in your blood test you had several screening tests done. So you had the 24-hour urine. What that measures is the amount of free cortisol you excrete into your urine over a 24-hour period. So that's a very good screening test. So yours came back elevated. So.
Back in October, yeah.
Right. The other screening test is the midnight saliva cortisol test.
I just recently did that, so I'm waiting for those.
Oh,
back.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So the midnight saliva test, the whole reasoning behind this, as Nick said earlier, is that your cortisol is usually the highest in the morning, but then as the night goes, it goes down, and it should be almost undetectable by midnight or by bedtime, late at night. So if you still have a elevated or normal level of cortisol, and this is detection of free cortisol through the saliva, so then that would be considered abnormal. Okay, and saliva test is usually done in sets of 3, because you do it over 3 nights, and what you want to see is at least 2 of the 3 being elevated. So you don't just see one and then have that be an outlier.
Yeah.
Right.
Makes sense.
Right. And then the last test you alluded to was the one where you take the pill at 11 and then you go in at 8 o'clock in the morning to get blood tests done. That's a dexamethasone suppression test. Okay, so this goes back to the feedback mechanism we spoke about last week.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Negative feedback.
Right, the negative feedback mechanism is that if you take any type of artificial steroid, what it should do is it should suppress your body's own steroid production. Okay, so the goal of it is to induce a negative feedback response in the body. So if you take dexamethasone, which is a very potent steroid, 1 milligram sounds like very little, but actually 1 milligram of dexamethasone is equivalent to taking about more than 20 milligrams of hydrocortisone.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's actually a very potent steroid. But when you take the dexamethasone, the hope is that it will suppress your body's own cortisol production. So it will lower the ACTH and it will lower the cortisol production from the adrenal glands. Okay, through this negative feedback mechanism. And in your case, it did suppress a little bit, but not enough. Okay, so the accepted level is a suppressed cortisol of less than 1.8. I think a couple of yours have been over, I think, 2.3 or still in that sort of more elevated area. Now, the more interesting thing about this, this is why we love endocrinology.
It's so complicated.
So complicated.
This is why we love endocrinology, is that you cannot take anything at face value.
Yeah.
So the interesting part of this is that, with Cushing's disease is more likely to have a partial suppression than if you have Cushing's syndrome from a adrenal cause. So if you have a tumor in your adrenal gland and you give the dexamethasone, you may not see that lowering of the cortisol like you do with the Cushing's disease, pituitary cause. And the reason for that is when you have a tumor in the adrenal gland, they're more likely to be autonomous, so they're not controlled by your body's mechanism. So it will always generate a certain level of cortisol, regardless of what else is happening,
Yeah.
because now it's not part of that feedback
Yeah.
mechanism. But with Cushing's disease, even if you have a tumor in the pituitary, a lot of times these will have partial response to a feedback mechanism. So, yeah, and this is how some medical treatments work for controlling Cushing's.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's the next step now?
So right now I'm waiting to hear back from the the neurosurgeon about the MRI that I got done Wednesday night. And that was an MRI with contrast and dynamic, something
Okay.
like that. I don't know. The way he described it to me was the first MRI only kind of gave 2 or 3 slices of the adenoma. So now he wants to have more slices of it so he can get a better idea of what
Get more detail, I guess. Yeah.
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 Yeah. And did you discuss surgery at all?
Possibility. I mean, he really wanted to see, that he had talked about possibly doing an angiogram as well.
What they call like a petrosal sinus sampling.
Yes, that. I do know it was going up and it was sneaking into the part that's there.
Yeah, because the blood there has more cortisol since it's right by the pituitary, right?
Right. So what petrosal sinus sampling is you pass 2 catheters into the base of the skull, where the pituitary then releases the hormone. And the goal is to get a catheter in the right and the left inferior petrosal sinus. And what it does is that it measures the amount of the ACTH that is being produced. But at the same time, you want to know if there is a gradient difference. Okay. So in your case, as you mentioned, is that your MRI was having a 2 millimeter, growth there. Okay. Well, you have to find out is that 2 millimeter growth what's really causing the problem.
Exactly.
And I think it was on the left side, right?
I think so, yeah.
On the left side, yeah.
And just to compare, how big generally is the pituitary gland?
The actual pituitary, it's like the size of a pea.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tiny.
So it's about, I'm just comparing like the 2 millimeters to its total size. So that would be like
Yeah, 2 millimeters is still considered a micro adenoma.
Yeah.
Anything over 1 centimeter. Usually when you see something that's 1 centimeter, it's actually bigger than the actual pituitary.
Yeah, okay, makes sense.
Yeah, so in your case with 2 millimeters is that they have to make sure that whatever is there is really causing the problem.
Right.
Because let's say they go in and they take out this 2 millimeter, growth there, and then find out that's not what's causing the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of what he had talked about, really wanting to make sure if you go in for the surgery that it's going to make the difference and make the changes. And
right. Because of course with any neurosurgery, you want the first surgery to be the last surgery, so you don't want to keep going back and having this done. But and the size of a tumor matters too. Okay, if you have anything, if you have a tumor that's greater than, let's say, 4 or 5 millimeters, then it's more likely that's the cause of the problem.
Right.
So if it's smaller than that size, then you have to go through the extra steps and then have that confirmation.
That's what you were saying. That makes it a lot more complicated. The fact that it is so small.
So that'll be. So I definitely agree, with the petrosal sinus. It's also important to find somebody who's experienced in doing it because it's not an easy procedure.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, as you had, in the past, when I was doing my fellowship, they have a very similar process for the adrenal glands. So if you have an adrenal tumor, sometimes they'll do the adrenal vein sampling for both sides. To make sure that the problem is actually coming from the growth on the adrenal gland. So when I was in fellowship, unfortunately, I had a patient who had a 2 centimeter growth. This was before I even saw him, and they took that out, and then found out the problem was actually from the other
Oh
side.
my
Oh
gosh.
man.
So actually caused by hyperplasia or increased cell growth on the other side of the adrenals. But then at that point, then you're stuck. It's like, well, do we take out the left adrenal too? And then
Have
this
no
guy,
adrenals.
right?
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
guy has no adrenals, and
So that's also brought up another thing too. When I was reading those articles, another symptom of Cushing's is excess body hair growth, and I think the reason for that is because the layer of the adrenal glands, I think it's the zona reticularis makes the androgens. I don't know, but anyway, it's right next to the one that makes the cortisol,
Yeah.
and that overstimulates that a little bit too,
To
and that
make
causes
the
to make
adrenal
more
androgens,
testosterone. Yeah,
right.
so
and it's because ACTH,
The
even
whole
though it stimulates, and this is where we need your help. We really need you to discuss the whole steroid pathway so we can understand it.
yeah,
Now-
so ACTH stands for adrenocorticotropic stimulating hormone, and it triggers the it stimulates the entire adrenal cortex, and there's 3 layers in there. There's glomerulosa, reticularis, and fasciculata. I don't remember which hormones come from which, but like we said, it makes testosterone and estrogen one. The other one makes cortisol, and the other one makes aldosterone. So technically, ACTH is triggering an excess production of not just cortisol, but estrogen, testosterone, and aldosterone.
Right.
And you don't really see, I mean, the aldosterone increase might not really cause maybe fluid intention because it's making you retain a little bit of sodium, but it's not really that big. So the biggest of those that you're getting the symptoms from is cortisol. And then if you're making more testosterone, you could have body hair growth in places you didn't have before either. So,
This is geek talk.
Yeah.
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 Brings me back to when I took classes with him.
No, this is why we have Nick on,
Yeah.
because Nick does all the geek talks.
Yeah. I know the details.
That's why we keep him around.
Oh, thanks. That's the only reason.
Yeah. So what you could see, even a defect in one place can cause multiple symptoms.
Right.
The other thing I was just mentioning, and this may tie back to the fibromyalgia too, is that if you have excess cortisol, it can actually cause muscle weakness, because it actually causes what we call peripheral muscle loss.
Yeah, so it causes atrophy. Yeah, that's
Right.
why.
So it causes muscle loss in arms and legs.
Mm-hmm.
So if you see somebody with very advanced Cushing's or long-standing Cushing's, is that they have very skinny arms and legs, but just a big belly and a big hump. And so all the fat is accumulated right in the middle, and that can cause fairly profound muscle weakness too. So if you've noticed with muscle pain, muscle weakness, even
affects your recovery too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
is that may be from the excess cortisol. So that's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
Could this have
That's a good
already
point.
extended
Yeah.
back? This, and the hope is that maybe if it's just one problem, if it's taken care of, could that take care of everything else?
Nice. Nice.
That would be nice.
I would love to not get headaches
Yeah.
every other day and migraines a few times a month.
Is that a symptom of excess cortisol?
With
Headaches?
migraine? Well, sometimes if the tumor is big,
Yeah.
if it's starting to get bigger and it's starting to expand the cella, or we call that little cup that the pituitary sits in.
I should have brought my skull model down.
Yeah. Maybe we can insert a picture like in the
Yeah, we could do that.
in the edits, but. If it starts pushing on that bone or starts eroding into the bone, it can cause pretty severe, persistent
Right.
headaches. Sometimes when it grows upwards and starts pushing on the your eye nerves sit right on top of the pituitary. So if it grows upwards and it pushes on, we call it the optic chiasm or the other optic nerve, is that then it can cause problems with your vision.
Right. They were checking my peripheral vision. I know
Right.
that because they weren't
I think we did that at one point too.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, I remember that.
I know. Is your peripheral vision still good?
Yeah, I think so.
checking. So, yeah.
So far, no issues.
Yeah.
Not walking into walls.
Well, what's interesting too, because your brain has a way of compensating. So even if you can't see a certain area in your peripheral vision, is that your brain will automatically fill it in
Yep.
with something.
Yep.
So then most people who have lost peripheral vision don't really realize it.
Right.
I mean, they would say something like, "Oh, I'm turning my head more when I'm driving, to look at the side view mirrors," or they notice that they can't see as well, in certain conditions, and that'll clue you in. But actually, in their mind, they're still seeing the whole picture. It's not like we're looking at something and you see a black spot right here.
Yeah.
Because your brain has a way of filling the empty. If it senses that there's no information in this area, it would just take information from another part and just fill it in right there.
Yeah. Brain's crazy.
Well, I guess it's in a way it's a relief that you know that there's something causing
Something's
it.
going on.
Getting some
not
answers,
going
yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
Right. And it's, I said it's frustrating
Yeah.
because it sounds like you put in all this effort into getting yourself healthy, but at the same time you're just getting sicker
Right.
and sicker all
Right.
the time.
Well, that's the same thing even happened with me. Like when we talked about this before, when he first saw me and my general practitioner gave him my blood work. Before, he's like, oh, he's probably just, tired, he's getting older and he's like doing a lot. And then when he saw my blood work, he was like, oh, never mind.
Yeah, it's
Oh, yeah.
20-some-year-old, probably partying and drinking too much. He just has to cut back a little bit. And that'll be interesting is down the line, if you do have, it taken care of this problem taken care of is it would be nice to follow up and just see
you
how
feeling?
much
Yeah.
that your symptoms have improved.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll be indoors by then.
Right. How's your experience been with the whole healthcare system?
I mean, not terrible, I don't think, I mean, there's some, I don't know. I definitely think I have better experiences than a lot of other people.
Like me.
Yes. I think I've lucked out a lot. I know a lot of people who have horrible experiences, so I really just think that I've lucked out more than anything else. But, yeah, it hasn't been terrible because I feel like I happen to find doctors that want to sit and listen instead of just push you through to get to the next, and sometimes because that's just what they're, being forced, their hands and stuff.
Yeah.
Like my neurologist will sit there and ask 1,000,001 questions and, and then same thing with my endocrinologist. Those are probably the two that I've now been seeing on a regular basis. So I think I've lucked out compared to a lot of other people.
Yeah.
Because I know it can be.
Sounds nice, doesn't it?
I wonder what planet your doctors are from.
I don't know. I'm not sure. But I'll take them. I will keep them.
The main thing, I think with disease conditions, with a lot of endocrine conditions, it's very complicated. And the key is to be able to listen, to keep an open mind, and to keep a open communication. Because I said if you went to somebody who you didn't have the same relationship with, and they tell you to go back and get your blood drawn for the 6th time, you would feel differently.
Right.
Okay. So now when you're going back to get your blood drawn the 6th time, then it's because your doctor genuinely care or
Right.
is looking for something, as
Right.
opposed to I don't know what to do. Let's send you back for a blood test.
Right. No, I don't feel like that ever. So.
Yeah, that's good.
and I think that's big.
Good.
But I think a lot of it comes from that, like, especially with the endo. She will explain, why she's thinking this and why she's doing this or why she's sending me again for something. So
Right.
I don't feel like it's just like.
Well, that's what you always did, and that's what I always kind of like comforted me.
Yeah.
We tried a lot of different tests.
Yeah.
and-
What tips do you have people out there, if
Go to the
if,
doctor.
you
Yep.
know,
Be persistent. Don't give up.
Yeah.
I feel like if you know something's wrong, like you're not feeling right. So there, you gotta be vocal about it though. Like nobody can read your mind either. So
Right.
like, you've got to
point.
really explain it in detail, like what you're feeling and what's going on, because that's only gonna help a doctor help you get better. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's this thing is one. You know your body better than anybody else.
Right.
Yep, that's the thing.
Yeah, I mean, you've been living with your body all your life, so you know how you feel. And unfortunately, I think a lot of times that's sort of belittled.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the thing is I always tell, this is one of the things I'm going to teach my fellows is always listen to the patient.
Yeah.
I said, who are you to argue with somebody who's been living with themselves for the past 30 years?
Very
Right.
good point. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And then the point that you said about going to the doctor, some people, like you're talking about your dad, don't want to go to the doctor. You only have one body for the rest of your life. You want
Right.
to take care of
Right.
it. So
Right. And
don't be afraid.
Yeah, and the key is longevity. The key is to be as healthy for as long as you can.
Right.
And of course still be able to enjoy life. But one of the biggest fears for most people are not that they're going to die at a certain time. It's how much are they going to suffer before they reach that point.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's something you have control over. That's with lifestyle, early intervention, early treatment. Yeah, but I'll be very curious to see how things go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
keep you updated.
and then thank you for coming, and hopefully we'll be able to get you back to update us
Yeah.
Yeah.
on everything.
So,
Yeah.
cool.
Sounds
All
good.
right,
Thank you.
thank you.